Jules, what TV show did you get into during your time inside?
I mean, I was watching TV all the time. No, I'm going to give you two.
Go on.
Hollyoaks.
I agree. Cool.
Never watched it before.
Yeah.
And Loose Woman.
Lunchtime.
Yes.
Lunchtime bang
Yes.
up. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay, I'll give you that's vouchable. For me, yeah, it's like game shows. So like one is really obscure called
Chase.
Only Connect and The Chase. The Chase was like dinner time.
Yeah.
And Only Connect, because like that one was a challenge. So if I got a question right, I'd be really happy. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, sweet.
Hello and welcome back to Life After Prison, The Sit Down. This is a podcast where we have in-depth conversations about the criminal justice system with people who have experienced it firsthand.
Yes, and in today's episode, we'll be joined by Dean Cramer, who served 6 years inside, and Sally Tilt, a forensic psychologist and the host of the Forensic Psychology podcast, here to talk about the impact that being in prison has on people. So, welcome, guys.
Hello.
How you doing?
How you doing? Good?
It's great to be on the sofas, they're very comfy.
No, it's great to have you guys.
Thanks for being here.
So when we speak to people, usually, and they've been to prison and then come out, they usually tell us that they've had feelings of being anxious, maybe distant from people, maybe just not feeling right. And we now realise that is actually a thing. And it's got a name for it. It's called post-prison syndrome.
Yeah, that might sound a bit technical, but luckily we've got a forensic psychologist here with us who can explain it a little bit more.
Yeah, so Sally, can you please explain what post-prison syndrome is?
It sounds worrying, I think, when it comes out like that, post-prison syndrome. And I think if people were listening, what I would want them to hear is that it's not the same as, say, getting a virus, or, you can't pick up post-prison syndrome from going to prison. But where it comes from is speaking to a lot of people that have been to prison. There's a pattern in some of the things they say they find happens to them after they come out from prison. And so by pulling those shared experiences together, there's a bit of a guide for what people might expect. And so I think in that sense, it can be a useful thing. So perhaps the label is, I would suggest, less useful in the sense that people might worry about it. It sounds like an illness.
Okay.
But more useful in the sense that it gives somebody something to realise they're not alone and that other people might be experiencing the same thing.
Talking about that, other people experiencing the same things, is this something that's quite common that you hear from people that have been inside?
Some bits are really common, and it'll be interesting to hear kind of people's experiences and whether they fit with the things that other people have generally said can happen. I would say there's not one way that people find they experience things when they come out of prison, but there are some common patterns that people tell us about that it's probably helpful for people to be aware of before they get released from prison, because that means that they can then sort of put some things in place. So what we don't like in our brains, we don't like surprises generally, do we? So if we can do some things to avoid those surprises.
That's a good shout. And Dean, does this stuff sound a bit familiar to you?
Yeah, 100% for me. When I got out, I felt like it was a thing of where I was sort of on autopilot. I found like I was trying to sort of give myself some structure, but I didn't know how to do it. So yeah, I just think, like I was basically needed help and a guidance to help me sort of get back into life. And at the time, I feel like the prison had a bad effect on me,
Yeah.
but I didn't realise.
Until you got out, right?
Until not even once I got out, I think after a few years, and I realised sort of like the situation I was in, and the fact that I didn't have the right guidelines in my head to sort of help me go forward, basically.
So okay, let's hear a little bit more about your story and, what was Dean like before prison, and what was life like?
Well, life for me was a bit hectic before I went to prison, because obviously I was doing stuff that led me there. But yeah, literally I was just living my lifestyle before. And then, once I got to prison, I think a lot of things changed for me. As soon as I was incarcerated, I realised that, the life I've been living wasn't sustainable. It obviously got me there. And I just felt like I needed to make a change in myself at that time. So, but beforehand, yeah, I was just living like most people do before they get caught.
Yeah, on the roads, doing what we was doing, innit?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I feel you. What did you end up doing? Like, how much time did you end up doing, and what was it for?
I got sentenced to 12 years, and I went guilty, so I did half. I got half off. My sentence was armed robbery.
Okay.
And obviously, which is, you know, quite a big crime. And yeah, basically, yeah, that was it.
What was going through your mind at that time?
What, whilst I was doing?
Like sentencing and like coming into prison,
To be
getting
honest,
12.
it was relief more than anything. Most people, I had a co-defendant, and he was sort of stressing when we first got in there, because obviously we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how long we was going to get, when the trial was, if we was going to trial. But for me, because I've been living a certain way for a long time,
Yeah.
it was literally relief. Before I went there, I used to always dream of getting chased. Yeah, it was like, I'd have like reoccurring dreams of just getting chased by things. Could be just random things, could be, I don't know, a demon, it could have been police. And I was constantly, because I was like that, you know, as you know from your experiences.
Cat and mouse game.
Yeah, you're always looking, obviously you have to. And then the first thing I noticed when I went in there, after about 3-4 days in Pentonville, I noticed that, I was relaxed. I wasn't dreaming about these things no more. I realised I've been caught, so I didn't have to watch over my back anymore. So I think for me, it was relief.
It's quite common to hear people say it's a relief.
Yeah?
Which sounds extraordinary, given that actually most people would think that would be the worst day
Yeah.
that could happen, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What else do you hear about people that come into prison?
I was just really interested listening to what Dean was saying there about your dreams, because our dreams are often a bit of a way of kind of tapping into some of the things that we're worried about, some of the thoughts that are going through our minds. And some people say that after they're released from prison, they dream perhaps that they're going back to prison or they're back in prison, and those dreams can be quite distressing.
I've had them before though.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah, that I'm back in prison. I'm like, what is this? Yeah. Now that you mention it, it's like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like our brains haven't caught up with what our new situation is. And that can be the cause of quite a lot of problems of, when we don't feel ourselves, when our brain, this is the way I like to think of it, when our brain hasn't quite caught up with where we are at the moment. So we're still sitting in the same fearful position that we were before, whether it's you're going to get caught by the police and you're being chased, or whether you're back in prison and you're trapped in the situation that you were before. So part of the trick is kind of bringing our brains up to speed for perhaps the safer situation that you are in now. And then that can help people to feel a bit better.
Okay. So on that one, sorry, now go on, bro.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's quite interesting talking about the dreams, because you reminded me that when I was in there, at some point I realised all my dreams, once I was in there, because I dream quite vividly for some reason, was all incarcerated.
Okay, I was literally just going to say the same thing, yeah? Because after a certain period, I was dreaming about prison.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I think I've been inside too long. Like my dreams weren't of freedom or being outside. It was about stuff that's happened in jail.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So like, I was going to ask, I don't know if you was going to ask Sally, but I was going to ask Sally, is that a normal response for the mind?
I would say it's really normal. So if you've heard anyone speak when they've learned a different language, I've sometimes heard people say that the time that they felt that they were really fluent in that language was when they started dreaming in the different language. And it's like your brain is now taking on kind of a different perspective. So I suppose what you're describing there is just, this is the world that surrounds you. If you imagine if someone was born in a prison and didn't ever know anything else, your dreams are really likely to be about that environment. And so almost what's happening, I suspect, is that those are the things that your brain needs to process, which is often what we're doing when we're dreaming. We're just sort of going over some of the things that have happened during the day that we might need to unpick a little bit more. So nothing to worry about. The only time it becomes a problem often is if people say that they're quite distressing dreams. Okay. So they might wake them up. And that can sometimes happen with perhaps a traumatic event that's happened, and people can't get rid of that thought in their head, and that comes particularly when they're dreaming. So that might be a problem. But I think what you've described there, Zach, is it shouldn't be something to worry about. It's just actually, God, look at that's really interesting. What my brain's doing.
Okay, cool. That's good to know.
And just touching on, when Dean said he felt relieved when he was inside, and that's maybe now I don't know if there's a link, but you know what you're facing, you know what you're doing. Like before, you didn't know, it was kind of unknown all the time. Like there's loads of conversations about, when you're on bail and stuff like that. really just hard work, and it's like it's so hard, it's so stressful. But even if you was facing like doing 6 years, that's a relief. So what goes through the brain when, you know, you're the unknown and then the known, even if it is like worst case? It's really interesting.
I guess our brains are brilliant, but they're made to solve problems. And so you give the brain a problem and it's working on it all the time. And so if there's actually some missing information, which is the case, I suppose, when you don't know if you're going to get caught or not. And so you're in a state of trying to solve, do I need to solve the problem of going to prison, or I might not get caught? And so you're sort of juggling it around all the time. Whereas it's easier once the awful thing has happened, because it can't happen tomorrow. So once it's there, we're really good often at coping with awful things. And you can hear people who've perhaps been in war or conflict situations. And as a species, we do pretty well. We actually respond to those things and we'll try and solve that problem. It's much easier, in fact, when we've got the problem to solve rather than when we're waiting for it to happen. So I think what you're just describing is a really common sort of human experience that we're applying to what happens when we're in prison. But we like certainty and we nail that, but we're not so good when we're kind of waiting, which is the bit of that anxiety feeling that you're describing. But yeah.
Thanks for that, Sally.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I'm always like wanted to know, like, it's like that it always happens. I'm so bad with unknown, but
no, me too. No, I don't know the solution. It's just, but it's helpful just knowing that it's not something wrong with us, isn't it? It's just the way our brains are wired. We'll automatically try and sort of solve that problem. But
so Dean, can you tell us a little bit what it was like for you actually inside, adjusting to, you know, how it felt, being banged up, you know, not having control or freedom, the food, like what was it like for you in that sense?
For me, I think that, like you saying, my brain sort of, like I just want to solve my problems. And where I realised, look, you're not going anywhere. You're going to be here. I adapted quickly, you know. I just realised, you know what, there's no point crying over spilt milk. It's just do what you're doing, make the most of your time. And I'm the type of person, I can't stand still anyway. I hate being in one place too much, especially before I went to prison. And I just sort of just tried to keep my brain active. It's funny how you mentioning languages, because I learnt a small amount of Spanish in jail.
¿Hablas español?
¿Hablas español?
Yeah. ¿Cuántos años tienes?
Sí, okay, yeah.
Well, right.
Was you better than me?
No, this is from school, but yeah.
No one told me this was going to be inspiring.
I've been trying to learn Spanish for ages and getting nowhere.
Yeah.
I just know basics.
That's all you need to know. But I started in there.
Okay.
You know, I found that as well with Zak. A lot of some of the prisoners, if they do put their minds to things, then, you know, I think that it's all a coping mechanism, you know. And for me, I was sort of addicted to, like, I had some of the man them in prison that when I come back from the library with the Spanish book, because they're getting the urban books.
Yeah.
And I come back with my Spanish speaking books and they're like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, I don't know, it's keeping my brain active, because it was hard as well. So yeah, for me, I just kept trying to, you know, keep my brain busy. When I banged up, when they shut the door, I just did things until it was time to sleep, and then just repeat the process. Just try and chalk off every day, really.
What about like the people inside? How did you react to people?
For me, they're the same people I used to see outside. Really? Yeah, it's just incarcerated. For me, I saw prison like a all boys school. You know, but maybe in East London, you know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So it's like, it's the same thing. It's just a lot of testosterone. But I wasn't really a hyper person. I'm quite calm. So I didn't really need to get myself involved with certain things. I'm not easily influenced as well. So if I see people doing certain things and I don't like it, I'm just not going to do it. It doesn't matter if you try pressure me, and to be honest, I didn't really have that. I didn't have anyone try and pressure me or cause any problems for me in prison, so I didn't. Good. Yeah.
To be fair, I find this interesting because when I was inside, I completely like shut down from people, and I didn't want to speak to people for ages, for like a good year into my sentence, and I didn't even want to look at people. I had like that persona.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it came from. I don't know why, but I thought it would be quite interesting, Sally, if you've heard of that kind of experience, or like, yeah, people doing that and why.
Well, most of the things that is really interesting listening. Most of the things just make perfect sense, really, to survive in those situations, I guess. And so, for instance, closing off yourself emotionally. If you're put in a place where a lot of your close relationships are removed from you, and we're social beings, we rely on that. We've evolved to live in groups, and we really rely on being amongst other people. And we only have to think of the damaging effect that can happen to people if you put people in solitary confinement for any length of time. And that's because we're driven to make those links with other people. So it seems a sensible thing to do, to kind of protect yourself in that situation. We're trying to limit the number of connections that you make, because then you can't lose those connections. So that sounds quite a sensible survival situation in that new environment where you don't know whether you can trust people. They're likely to be sort of a lot of new faces on a frequent basis. So there's a big sort of turnover if you compare that to life outside, where we generally see the same faces on a fairly regular basis.
I just thought, because we are social people, I thought maybe it'd be the opposite. Like, I do know some people that were inside and just clung on to other people, and I would have thought it might be the opposite, that you need people, you want people around you. But I was very different. Is that just different with people, or what would you say?
Well, if I put it back to you, do you know why you did it? Have you thought about it since? Have you had a chance to kind of unpick what that served for you? Because there'll be a reason that it worked for you, I guess.
It really worked.
Yeah.
I just felt like it allowed me to focus on me maybe a bit more. So I wasn't interested in other people. Maybe it was because I was really interested in what I wanted and what I was doing and how I was going to survive, I guess, and how I was going to come out a better person.
You sound like you had a plan. And it's sort of similar to what Dean said. You had a plan for how you're going to get through this pretty tricky situation.
Maybe people have that plan then in their head from the get-go. Zach, how was it for you?
No, because I relate to both. I'm probably in between both of you, because I was like a bit like Cramer. I was prepared that I could go to prison at any time, and then it is what it is. You can't change it. Yeah. You just got to ride it. Exactly. But I was also like Jules, because if I didn't want to speak to no one. Mm-hmm. Like, do you know what I mean? I just wanted to just find out what my time is and figure out how I'm going to deal with prison. So I was kind of the mix between the two. If I was friends with someone, you're my friend, I don't need new ones. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do my time. I know do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I was in between. And I feel that kind of, it is a coping mechanism to a certain extent. But also I feel like it's what you need in order to get through it. So similar to Cramer, I had to like immerse myself in what prison life was like, but at the same time not get involved in the social nonsense that goes on. And I don't need to chat to people. I just need to, you know what I mean?
I think you touched on it earlier as well, like people can adjust quite quickly as well. Mm-hmm. That's what you did say. Yeah. I was gonna, just touch on that a little bit more.
Well, and hopefully they do, because one of the things, like listening to the three of you describe that, it does sound like you quickly learn what you had to do individually to cope in that situation. And what the research suggests is that the people who struggle are people perhaps, as if, for instance, a category of people who are wrongly convicted or people who deny their offence, and so don't feel that there's sort of any justness to them being in prison, or, in their head constantly is a feeling of that's not fair, I shouldn't be here, I need to hide to that. Yeah. Okay. Whereas, and I'm not suggesting that people just, go with the flow of being in prison, but there's some sort of ease mentally if you don't try and fight it, because you actually can't get out. So you actually are going to be there. So that's not something that's worthwhile spending the cognitive energy on. Whereas if you can find a way to make it work for you, which is what I'm hearing you all describe, then you're more likely to feel kind of a bit empowered and then find that you've got some personal control over a situation.
I think that rings true.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Having the onus and a bit of control in what you do.
I think
in a place where there's no control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I can echo that as well, like what you were saying, because I think at first, my first couple of years, for some reason people gravitate to me. Okay. So I was a lot like you, but they'd still be there. And I you get rid of them. Literally, you understand. So at first I was very social, or sociable, if that's the word. And then after about 2 years, I just went like you. Okay. I was like, don't talk to me. I was miserable.
I was the opposite.
And you went the other way.
Yeah, after a year and a half, I made friends and I was like, having a great time watching Love Island. So,
I suppose it's where you're at and who you meet.
So talking about that, did you notice changes in your behaviour then, like whilst you was in prison?
Yeah, I didn't notice it so much at the exact time, but I did feel like, I don't think people influenced me, but it depends, like, what's going on, what's happening because there's a lot of stuff that does happen in prison. And I think it does. And for me, when I started to get a bit moody, it was me sort of trying to remove myself, like be mind, like don't get involved, because people can drag you into stuff you ain't got nothing to do with, you know? So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, so it is really interesting how prison can affect your mindset and affect you mentally, including being in a confined space, being away from loved ones, being around officers, not having your right to do what you want. And I just wanted to ask you, Sally, like, how does it actually condition the human mind, and do these things actually make a difference in the brain, and that's why we behave the way we do?
So I would say, because listening to the three of you, there's not one thing that happens when people go to prison. So people experience different things. And so some people might experience perhaps a traumatic experience where there's violence or there's threats of violence involved. And if that happens to someone, when you do brain imaging, you can see the effect that has inside someone's brain. So there's a part of our brain called the cortex. And as we get older, this happens with everybody, your cortex gets a little bit thinner. So when you're doing the scans, you can kind of see it getting thinner and thinner. And so that's sort of a sign of kind of biological aging. And what we know is that if people have traumatic experiences that involve threats and violence, you can kind of see the biological aging. Yeah, it's getting a little bit thinner in one particular part of the brain, but a different part of the brain gets a little bit thinner.
Does that heal itself or not?
Well, the brain's brilliant. So all of us can, there's this thing called neuroplasticity, and generally that means that you can kind of build back up function in parts that you've lost. So it doesn't mean necessarily you can completely take away some of the things that have happened, but generally people can kind of build those things back up again. But you might find a different sort of impact on a different bit of the brain if, say, somebody, and most of the research comes from children. So if they've been neglected as a child, so they might not have had physical violence, they might not have been experienced that, but they might have been neglected and perhaps had quite a deprived sort of environmental setting. And then you get a thinning in a slightly different bit of the brain. So if we sort of take that research, which has been done with children, but apply it to what people might be experiencing in prisons, then basically you're probably going to get different impacts depending on the different sort of threats or trauma that people experience when they're in there. So not one thing, but it's I suppose it's useful to know that there are some sort of physical changes that might be happening when we put people in different environments. It's a bit sort of, it might sound a bit worrying that, but I should say
it's very interesting that there's studies that it actually does affect the brain.
So we often forget our brain is like we muscles. We expect to go to the gym and our muscles will get bigger if we work out, and we perhaps don't picture our brain working in the same way, but it's really similar. It sort of runs in much the same way, that if you use a particular part or you sort of
the same principle.
If we take confinement as one. Can confinement alone just affect the brain?
There's going to be similarities, isn't there, that are going to be sort of common with that. So you're not going to be able to build up those social relationships. So you might expect to see some sort of differences in those parts of the brain where we reach out to other people. But that said, I think it depends on what you take in, what brain you take in to prison with you.
Okay.
So if you take a brain into prison that's perhaps in a bit of a poor shape, and perhaps someone's had lots of adverse experiences as a child, you're already going in with some of those pathways of vulnerability already shaped already, and you perhaps might think of yourself as being less resilient to cope with some of the things that might happen in there. And then someone else might actually find, almost a bit like you were saying, the relief of, compared to where you'd come from, there's a relief of thinking, right, that's happened now, I'm in here, I've got a plan, and I'm going to kind of take this pathway. So I suppose it sort of depends, as I say, what brain you take in with you and what body you take in with you as well, and what your experiences have been.
Super interesting. No, it makes sense.
Is there like any like research on the differences between like what how much the different experiences can differ, like depending on, you know, the variables like age, length of sentence, and possibly what the person's pre-exposed to. Does that make a difference?
And most of the time when I'm sort of talking, I'm taking research from different areas. So it'd be lovely if there was, this big body of evidence that says, if you're 32 and you go in and you serve 6 years, this is what happened. And we haven't got that much information. But and a lot of the studies that have been done with people who spent a really long time in prison. And I think people do that because they think we're most likely to find the biggest impact when the sentence has been longer. And to some extent, there's some logic in that. The way that I sort of think about it is if I said I'd served a 6-month sentence, people would probably say, "Oh, short sentence. That's a little sentence." If I said, I'd spent 6 months lying in a cold bath, you'd go, "Wow, Sally, that's a really long time. 6 months is not a short time." But in sort of prison currency, sentence length, we think of it as a short time. Whereas if we said, "All right, you're going to live on beans and toast for the next 6 months," you'd think 6 months. That's a really long time. So I suppose we think, in answer to your question, Zach, we think probably it would make sense that the longer you spend in prison, some of those things might become more ingrained. But if someone's been in prison for even a short time, I would say they should still probably, it's beneficial to give it some thought about how they might feel when they come out. I mean, I know even if I go on holiday, I'll come back and I have to adjust to being back in my house again, or, things being a little bit different. We as a human sort of adapt to the environment around us. And so it makes sense that it might take a little time to adapt when we come out of prison as well.
I think it's true what you said though earlier about experiences. Your experience in there could define how that affects you, So like you said, I've seen people in there that have been struggling, maybe they're getting bullied or maybe they're on drugs and they're chasing drugs. So, I do think that, I think with us three seem to have a similar situation where we sort of just kept ourselves to ourselves, maybe thinking now, as we're talking, that was to make sure we avoid situations, and I think maybe we minimized the
adverse,
of the experience.
Yeah, you're selecting the bits that are going to work for you. And
subconsciously said, you know what, I don't want to get in this, so I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And Sally, you just touched on, kind of coming out of prison, or, though the changes may be there. So Dean, I kind of wanted to know what it was like for you, first of all, mentally getting out of prison and how.
I was a myth when when I look back now, I realise I didn't take it, even silly example, films. I watched film in the first 2 years. I watched loads of films and I can't tell you what they was about, what I see.
Okay.
So at the time, I felt like, I'm trying to say I was just there. I don't think it was, for some reason, I still don't understand. It didn't sink in. There's things I can't remember that I've done that people say, "Oh, do you remember when we went there?" And I was like, I can't actually remember that. 6 years for me, I thought I was with a lot of people that was doing longer sentences. So I thought that it wouldn't affect me. So I didn't come out of that mindset. I just thought, I'm out. And in fact, looking back from the first day I was affected, even the pictures I look back when my missus picked me up and took a picture of us, and I was sort of looked away with the fairies basically. And I was saying obviously for me, the technology was the biggest change, because I noticed wow, I think smartphones were just coming out when I went in. So
and then
I was one of the only people that had a smartphone, and it didn't have all the stuff that it had. So when I come out, I was literally to apply for a job, you have to have emails and you have to have all these other things. I couldn't even do that. And even the smart TVs, they were smarter than me. I didn't know how to operate the TV.
I hear you,
I was trying to operate the TV. I was like, what's going on? I just turn it on. Normally you get 1 to 5 or what channels we have in there. And it's just, it was just a big...
culture shock.
Yeah, it was just hard for me to adapt. But like I was saying, I didn't realise at the time that there was a lot of things I was doing that I didn't seem to, even now I can't sort of tell you exactly what I'd done or what I was doing at the time, because I don't know why, really. Psychologically, I just don't think I was there. A lot of different situations I found.
The way you said you're away with the fairies, what do you think, Sally, that is why that happens? You're not actually connected outside. How long do you think you were like that for?
Looking back, roughly about 2 years.
That's a considerable
Long
amount of time. Yeah.
You're like not connected.
Well, Dean's almost describing post-incarceration or post-prison syndrome. That's a really common thing that people say, that in your mind things have stayed the same and you come out, and what a shock that is that they haven't. And I think, a lot of people will have experienced that when they haven't perhaps seen a nephew or a cousin for a few years, and you expect them to still be 6 and then they're 12, and it's the same kind of thing, that our brains just have got the outside stuck, and so then you arrive into a world which feels really alien, and so your brain's doing catch up all the time, so you're working overtime to try and catch up, I suppose, with what you're seeing around you, and how people have changed, and how those relationships have altered. We build up a picture, I guess, so in terms of what we expect to happen, and then you find yourself there, and it feels quite different to that. So it sounds like you were doing the spot on job of just kind of adapting to life outside. It can be a bit of an intimidating, scary experience.
It's very true what you said, because literally I think because you're trying to get up to speed with life again, you got, and especially if you was doing crime and stuff before, you wasn't living as a normal person. Yeah. Now you have to live normal. Now you got to get back. And for me, I went into prison quite old. Like, I wasn't young when I went into prison. To some guys like you was quite young. Yeah. I was coming up to my 30s. I was 30 actually. And so it maybe that might have affected me differently. And to come out, obviously I'm approaching the 40s, or 36, 7 I was when I got out. And I was thinking, do you know what? Like, I have to now start again. So maybe that was something to do with it as well.
How did you
being
feel?
Behind all the time?
Sorry, how did you feel in a social situation?
Like, I thought maybe like if I went to a club and stuff, I'd be thinking, but I was fine in club situations. But I did find like in weird, I don't know, if I was in the park or if there was too many people too close, then I was like, I sort of backed myself up to the wall. Yeah. I did find that, or sociably, I wasn't really, I sort of went backwards a little bit, I think. It took me a while to start being able to, even new people, like talking to a new person, I don't know, maybe a bit wary. So that, I think socially, I was, definitely.
When a new person comes on the way, not chatting to you straight away, man.
Exactly. You said, when you've been around too many people, and
it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
When I've been around too many people, when I come out, it's too much. At the start, I couldn't even speak to people I knew.
Yeah, I couldn't go shopping centres.
No,
I couldn't be on a packed. I had to get off a packed train because there's too many people around.
Is that just because we're so used to being around, fewer people? And the same people, that's just overwhelming? Or
it's so interesting. It is almost like reading the papers, the research papers that are written on it, because it's exactly what people say, that partly people talk about this term being hyper aroused when you're in prison. So you're sort of constantly alert for things that might go wrong, sort of threats that might happen. People you can and can't trust. And I'm doing my eyes big in that way.
Sounds quite tiring, doesn't it? Well, the mind's
to be.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. And you almost, it's that catch-up thing that I was mentioning earlier. You almost need to allow time for your brain to catch up. And it can be quite helpful to kind of say to yourself, I'm actually in a safe place now. I'm in a safe place. I'm not under threat. Because actually in prison, it probably is quite sensible sometimes to be have that alertness and that hyper arousal, because sometimes there can be things that are quite risky in prison. So it's unfortunate that we don't come with a button, I think, isn't it? If we came with a button where we could go in prison, out of prison, like just one that we could switch ourselves on and off, that would be really neat. But because we don't have that, we have to allow that time for our brains to kind of catch up with where we really need to be, kind of from our new situation. Can I just ask another thing, Zach? You said about going shopping. So one other thing that some people have said is the sort of difficulty with lots of choice when they go out. And so I don't know if that's something you just had in a shop and pick, and I still do it.
I was going to say I'll still do it. I'll still do it.
And it's one thing I've carried on for like 3, I don't know how, I don't even know when I got out now, but I still find it hard to pick something.
So one of my boys took me shopping, and He's like, bruv, it's not a fashion show, just pick something and let's go. But like in my mind, I'm like, what do I pick?
Yeah, it's true.
Like,
There's too much options.
So it's options. Even going into like a corner shop, you want to get a chocolate bar or something. I'm like, what one do I want?
Yeah, it's true.
Food, but
Same effect.
You know?
Same thing.
Why do you think that is, Sal? Like, you know, like there's, with what Dean said about the 2 years being a blur, and what Jules has mentioned about, you know, not being comfortable around so many people. What can someone do to make those kind of things easier? How can someone make that process a bit smoother?
Well, I mean, you're going to be the best people to answer these. So what some of the things that I would suggest would be knowing it might happen is an advantage. So as I said sort of earlier on, generally we don't like surprises in our brains. We like to know what's going to happen. So if you go into it thinking, when I get released from prison, I might go to the supermarket and I might be frozen in indecision about whether to get the 200 mils or the 500 mils of milk. So knowing it might happen, you can anticipate it, and then people talk about, you might not be able to change it, but you might be able to sort of go with it. You might be able to surf those waves a little bit. So just being a bit prepared for it can be a good thing. And then I would say, I suppose, if it goes to another level, because from what you've described, you sound like you kind of coped with it fairly well, in that you could acknowledge it was happening, but you were making progress in feeling more yourself as time went on. And if that's happening, that's great. Most people will work their way through it, okay? But if people get stuck, then it might be a point that people go and seek some extra help to get some support to get them sort of, moved over that barrier that seems to have happened, that's kept them stuck in that feeling of fear, I suppose.
Yeah, because, I don't know, I'm going to put this to you guys first, and then we'll go back to Sally, yeah? How long did it take you to feel like you're back to like your own self?
Like I was saying, that for me, probably a couple years.
Couple years, yeah.
And I've known like a lot of people, it's quicker for them. So I don't know. It's quite interesting what you said about the on-off button. Mm-hmm. I feel like I actually did that.
Okay.
I think I'd literally turn my button off when I went in.
Yeah.
And it's like, certain people I've forgotten about.
Right.
That I met in there that I was quite close with.
Uh-huh.
So I put that down to you just like autopilot, you're just going through it. And I think like what you said, if you was prepped for little things like going to the supermarket, you don't think about that. You think, I need to prepare myself for a bit to go shopping. You just think, I'm just going to go. You're looking forward to that inside. But yeah, that's what I think.
What about you then, Jules? How long did it take for you to feel like your normal self?
What have I said before? I think it's the same, about a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to understand or to ask if there's anything that won't ever go, because I feel like there are some things, like I am different now, but I don't know whether this is from where I've carried things from prison or not. And I wonder, just, is there some things that will never go, and you'll have post-prison syndrome possibly forever, or I don't know what.
I mean, I feel like flipping it around a bit to make it a bit more positive, because look at the three of you sitting here. Life is good. You're doing really well. And so the things that come from prison aren't all bad, are they? So some of those things that you might say, will they always stay there? You'll hopefully carry, I would suggest, some of the positive things that you got from being in prison, because it won't be all bad. There'll be a strength of mind that you'll gain from it, and the sort of experiences that you've learned about drive and, I don't know, setting goals, or really appreciating things that you might not other appreciate. Those sorts of things, you might not want to let those things go. Yeah. So if that's a syndrome, let it be a syndrome, and sort of bring it on.
So you're going to just work on the things that you might not like, that you still have.
I would say so, yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, go on.
And I was just going to ask you, Dean, was there anything that you built up inside, maybe a mechanism or a coping mechanism that you actually find useful now?
Yeah, well, the thing is, before I wasn't really lazy, but obviously I was busy in things I shouldn't be doing. But I think it gave me drive to do things and just keep going, get up early. I was kind of like that before a little bit, so maybe that's a little bit of a thing. But I don't know, I think just to get it, just go and get it.
Go get it.
Yeah, you're just gonna...
Yeah.
That situation showed it can be worse. You could be stuck for years.
Yeah.
And then what's worse than that?
So it gives you extra drive, extra energy.
Drive. Look, like Sally's saying, where you are now, you know, you might have not been in that same position if you
If you work for prison.
Yeah,
that's true.
And I think it's true what you're saying. There's positives in your mental that you can gain that you've got from prison, you know. And I think I've changed. You know, I've had some people tell me, yeah, they think I've changed. You know, with some not great as well. You know, like my attitude. Maybe I'm a bit more moodier than I was before.
Did you think you developed that in prison? Yeah,
I think so.
Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think there's probably quite a few things, you know, because maybe in life as you get older anyway, you change, you develop little things that might change you, you know. But obviously, I do put it down to prison as well, you know. I think before I was probably more like happy-go-lucky, kind of laughy, and I'm still like that. I've got that back in the last few years. I think since I sort of landed on my feet with my work and I started feeling better, you know, I got young kids now, so that changed me a lot as well. But yeah, I feel like there was a lot of strength from it in a way. Like you're saying, I realised if I can do that, and then I can do basically anything, and it's just made me wiser to not do stupid things. There's consequences.
Yeah, you appreciate your life more, innit?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think, so like, having said that, do you think what specifically has prison changed, like, about the way you behave? What can you say specifically?
Patience.
Okay.
I'm still very impatient. I've always been impatient. If I want something, so you're saying before, I want it sort of now.
Uh-huh.
But with prison, you can't get anything you want now.
Mm-hmm.
You have to wait. You have to put in an app.
Even in canteen, you got to wait.
You gotta wait.
Your app's not going anywhere.
The app didn't even leave the win, you know? But yeah, patience, which like I said, some people still say I'm impatient. But yeah, you know, you can work for something. I think before I went to prison, I just wanted everything there and then.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like we're saying, it taught me, well, you're going to have to see the bigger picture and look ahead. I would live in the moment all the time before.
Okay.
And now I'm sort of like, I can see or what I might want to do in a year's time, or how I can take the steps to get there, you know? So, yeah, definitely, you know, it gives you sort of organisation in a way, innit? It's just crazy. It's like you're regimented.
Yeah.
So if you continued... Most people, I think, they continue that regiment after prison. You know, I've had guys that have just come out as well.
Do you think it gives you that structure?
Yeah, definitely, because they're in that structure. They call me early, you know, 6 o'clock. I'm not even up yet, mate. I don't need to wake up till 7. So, yeah, I think they're still in that zone. With some people, it takes them a while maybe to get, you know, to. But I think if you keep that, that's a good one. It's not a bad thing. Go sleep early.
Yeah, waking up early.
It's interesting what you said about almost the last thing to come back. It sounds like you're saying was your identity and your sort of self-confidence and the way you saw yourself as a person. That bit came back, and that was almost your signal to yourself that, yeah, you were back to Dean again. And that might be nice for people to hear, I guess, in that it might not feel like your identity is truly there for a while, but it's in there somewhere. And once everything else settles, it'll come back out again. So, you know, you can do the happy-go-lucky, cheery bit again.
Exactly, 100%. And I just think it's also down to the experiences of what's actually happening in your life. You know, if you haven't got work and you got bills to pay, and you can't pay them, then obviously, I think that was a big psychological thing for me before, because before, when I didn't have money, I knew what to do to get money. And in this situation, I was like, I haven't got money. I still haven't got money. Don't know how I'm going to get money. I have to go to an interview. That doesn't guarantee me getting my finances being good. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of different variables to...
But I think that's a big point you mentioned, because like what you're saying, your life's in a better place when you're personally and professionally and within your personal life, like your own like family setting or whatever. But like that's what that's like a massive signal that, okay, I can, you know, feel myself again. I can take more time, because for me, I don't know, I had to build, you had to build yourself again. You're starting from scratch.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's getting back to a level where you're like, okay, this is kind of familiar.
Yeah.
And
even things like confidence. I wasn't confident and I come out. And I've always kind of been confident, but literally when I got out, I was like, wow, I'm a bit, like you're saying, like talking to people and stuff like that. It would take me a minute to get like anywhere near comfortable. So
I guess if you're not comfortable somewhere, you're not confident, like naturally. So, building your life back up on the out, once that's building, the confidence comes with it. So must have felt really hard being a confident person and then coming out and not feeling that.
Yeah, it definitely was. Especially, like I said, I didn't realize any of it straight away. It just took a while. I thought, wow, I'm not confident at all, So, yeah, it literally, it's just, there's many things that affect you whilst you're there.
I've been saying that, Dean. What would you say? Yeah, what would your advice be to someone who's preparing for release, for life after prison? What would you say to them?
I'd echo a lot of the things you said. If you can prep yourself for things that you're not prepped for, plus I don't think they help you. Maybe some people they help, but I don't think they didn't. In my personal experience, like probation and stuff like that, they didn't really give me a plan or say you was gonna come out and do this and come out and do that. So I think preparation. What's that saying? If you fail to prepare,
prepare to fail.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you fail to prepare, then prepare to fail.
100% true. If someone told me, look, you might be awkward in social situations, so be aware of that. When you get there, try and put your back against the wall and look like you're gonna, hurt people and stack.
Yeah, you're saying it. Do you ever think, how did I look in that situation?
Yes. I know. Well, I've got honest people around me, so they tell me you looked a bit crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? I looked crazy. Like, just backed up and you look stiff and tense.
My friends have told me as well. They're like,
your face is straight.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize.
But then they tell you, now you're back, innit?
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, now you're back now.
Yeah, quite a bit back. Well, because I got a lot of different, I still know a lot of the people I knew before, but I'm sort of more around other people that I've
circles,
met sort of since. And the thing with that, they don't really know me from before. So they've sort of brought out a bit more of a happy-go-lucky side. Because they ain't judging me or not like my people is judging me, but just like
there's no that
they don't know me from exactly. It's no baggage. So they're just seeing what they see, and what they see, they seem to like what they see. So that makes me think, well, you must be.
You're all right. You're all right.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You're
great.
Yeah.
So I mean.
Oh. I mean, Sally, you did quite well summing off a couple of those things. But Sally, I was going to ask you, you said some incredible things. Can you recap on any tips, tools, resources for people who might be experiencing any of these issues?
I'm just going to add really to what Dean said, because he did say it really nicely. And the only thing I'd add to that possibly that might be helpful is to have a chat to people that are really important to you, that you're going to go out and spend sort of close time with. So if you're going to be moving back in with a partner or with family members, it might be worth having that conversation that it might be slightly different because it might take a while for it to feel back to normal. Because I'm imagining that it might be that people think it's going to be brilliant. We're going to kick off where we were, right from that, it's going to feel exactly the same. And actually for that person and for you, it might be worth having that chat beforehand, that it might take a while to kind of just warm back into life. And so don't take that as a sign that, perhaps you don't feel the same. Another couple of tips I'd just suggest is don't always trust your feelings, because sometimes our feelings aren't necessarily helpful. The same with our thoughts, I'd say. We have a thought and we believe it to be true, and it's just a thought, it's not a fact. So just because you're having a thought, just because you're feeling a feeling, it doesn't mean that that's the way it is. So as an example, if you think my feelings are a bit flat towards someone I was in a relationship before, I'd say give it some time, because what do you actually believe about that person and about your relationship together? And give it some time just to work back to the feelings will follow, if you like. So don't always trust the feelings that you're experiencing.
Give it some more time.
Yeah. And then perhaps for people who are experiencing something that's a bit more extreme, so if they are really struggling and they're finding sort of signs of that might be if their heart's beating very fast, or they are re-experiencing being back in prison and they're finding it sort of a bit terrifying, I guess, because that would be a sort of unpleasant situation to be in. I'd say try and seek some help. But in the meantime, try and get yourself into what's happening now. So think to yourself, what's happening now? And really think, I'm not under threat, I'm in a safe place, and there's no need to be feeling fearful. And you can sort of say it out loud, and then gradually your brain will hear it and you'll start to calm down a bit. So to try and ground yourself into the now for the moment. But yeah, just to add to what Dean said, because I think your tips are top ones, really.
Yeah, thank you both for that advice. What we also like to do in Life After Prison is signpost organisations that can support you when you are newly released from prison. And one of those are giveusashout.org. Shout is the UK's first and only free confidential 24-hour text messaging support service for anyone who's struggling to cope with mental health issues such as depression, anxiety and abuse. There's always someone willing to speak to you, so check them out.
Also Northern Learning Trust. So they have a Reaching Out project, which has a team of trained volunteer mentors who provide advice, guidance, help and support, as well as someone to talk to. And they have ex-offenders as peer mentors. So these people know what you're going through.
Yeah.
And all these organizations are on our website. We have covered mental health quite a lot in this episode. So if you are struggling with this or need any help or advice, then you can check out our other podcast called Getting Out. We have an episode called Mental Health, and we're with Wendy Robinson from Calm.
Yes, we also like to hear from you, so please drop us a comment below and tell us about your journey of life after prison, and if you've experienced any signs of post-prison syndrome. We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a comment. We also do love you getting in touch with us. And I wanted to read out a message that we got from a university student on Instagram. And they said, hi guys, I've never come across you before, but I love how you turned a bad situation into a positive by using your experiences and sharing with people. You guys are teaching me a lot. I'm going to go through all your podcasts. Keep doing what you're doing. You're smashing it. So thank you very much for that message. We want to hear from you. So drop us a comment below and let us know about your journey of life after prison. And you can get in touch with us by DMing us on Instagram and Twitter at AfterPrisonPod. Or if you want to send an email, you can send an email to podcast@prison.radio. Or if you prefer to write to us, you can write to us at Life After Prison, National Prison Radio, HMP Brixton, London, SW2 5XF. Jules did mention our website, which is lifeafterprisonpod.com. And on there, you can drop us a voice message too.
So a massive thank you to Dean and Sally for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
You guys have been incredible.
Yeah, really good conversation.
A massive thank you to you guys for listening. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.